For the first time in history, some of America's closest allies, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, have taken the unprecedented step of imposing coordinated sanctions against the United States itself. Yes, you read that right. The nations that have stood shoulder to shoulder with America through 2 world wars, the Cold War, and every global crisis for nearly a century are now targeting a single individual and his inner circle, Donald Trump. These sanctions are sweeping and precise, freezing assets, banning travel, and restricting financial transactions for Trump, 17 of his top aides, and over 40 American companies tied to his sprawling business empire. The announcement hit at exactly 6 a.m. Eastern Time, simultaneously from Brussels, London, Ottawa, and Canberra, a meticulously coordinated strike designed to hit before the American markets even opened. But this isn't about trade disputes, tariffs, or politics as usual. According to the joint statement, these sanctions are a direct response to documented corruption, constitutional violations, and the systematic erosion of democratic institutions, actions that threaten not just America, but the stability of the entire Western alliance. It's shocking, unprecedented, and impossible to ignore. History has never witnessed America's closest allies take such a bold stand. This isn't just about strained diplomatic relationships or policy disagreements. We're talking about America's oldest allies treating the American president like they would treat a dictator from a hostile nation. And trust me, the implications for American power, prestige, and global standing are absolutely devastating. Let me fill you in on what's been happening. The relationship between Trump and traditional American allies has been deteriorating since his first term. He questioned NATO commitments, insulted allied leaders, imposed tariffs on Canadian and European goods, and repeatedly suggested that America's security guarantees couldn't be trusted. From the get-go, allied governments were concerned that Trump viewed partnerships built over decades as transactional arrangements to be renegotiated or abandoned. But here's where the rubber meets the road. According to Politico's December 5th report, Allied intelligence services have been sharing information for months about what they describe as the complete breakdown of constitutional governance in the United States. The leaked financial documents showing foreign payments to Trump reportedly confirmed suspicions that Allied intelligence agencies had developed through their own sources. One European intelligence official told reporters that they had been watching money flow to Trump from adversarial governments for years, but couldn't prove the full scope until the Desert Files leak. This mess is unfolding because Allied governments concluded that working with Trump's administration had become impossible, and that treating the United States as a normal partner was enabling corruption that threatened their own security. The coordinated sanctions represent a collective judgment that diplomatic engagement has failed and that stronger measures are necessary. And before we go any further, let's be real for a second. Allies sanctioning the United States is genuinely unprecedented. For 250 years, America has been the nation that imposes sanctions, not the nation that receives them. The psychological and strategic shock of this reversal cannot be overstated. Now, back to the matter at hand. Here's where it gets interesting. Reports from December 5th revealed just how extensive the preparation for this action was. According to CNN, Allied governments began secretly coordinating in late summer after it became clear that Trump's second term would not moderate his approach. Weekly video conferences between senior officials from all 4 governments developed the sanctions framework, identified targets, and planned the simultaneous announcement. The sanctions themselves are comprehensive. They freeze all assets held in allied nations by the designated individuals and entities. They ban all travel to the European Union, UK, Canada, and Australia. They prohibit any financial institutions under allied jurisdiction from processing transactions for sanctioned parties. And they warn that secondary sanctions may be applied to any entity that helps sanctioned parties evade these restrictions. According to the joint statement, the legal basis for these sanctions includes documented evidence of corruption through foreign payments, obstruction of justice in federal proceedings, and actions that constitute a fundamental threat to democratic governance in a manner that endangers the security of allied nations. Essentially, America's allies have concluded that Trump represents a threat to their security and have responded with the tools they typically reserve for hostile regimes. This wasn't a hasty reaction. This was months of deliberate planning culminating in coordinated action. This announcement sent shockwaves through global financial markets because it raised immediate questions about American economic stability and the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. The S&P 500 futures dropped over 4% within an hour of the announcement. Gold prices spiked. Treasury yields gyrated wildly as traders tried to assess what allied sanctions against America would mean.
Now, this isn't the first time we've seen international concern about Trump's conduct translate into concrete action. The pattern of Allied frustration has been building throughout his return to power. Just think about how European leaders responded to Trump's suggestions that NATO commitments might not be honored. At a Munich Security Conference, European Commission, President Ursula von der Leyen warned that Europe needed to prepare for an America that might not be a reliable partner. Defense spending across Europe increased dramatically as governments hedged against American abandonment. Then there was the G7 summit fiasco earlier this year. Trump refused to sign the joint communique, insulted the Canadian Prime Minister publicly, and reportedly told other leaders that America didn't need allies who weren't paying their fair share. According to a European diplomat who spoke to The Guardian, the summit ended with other leaders genuinely questioning whether the Western alliance could survive. And let's not forget how allied governments reacted to the leaked financial documents showing payments from foreign adversaries.
Within hours of that leak, multiple allied foreign ministers issued statements expressing grave concern and calling for transparency. When Trump responded by attacking the journalists and calling the documents fake, allied governments noted that no evidence was offered to contradict the documented payments. Even the intelligence sharing relationship, the crown jewel of the Western alliance, has reportedly been compromised. According to MSNBC's reporting, Allied intelligence services have restricted what they share with American counterparts out of concern that information might reach Trump and, through him, the foreign governments making payments to him. Now it looks like Allied patience has finally been exhausted. So what specifically triggered this coordinated action at this particular moment? The sanctions represent a judgment that engagement with Trump has become counterproductive. Well, it all boils down to the accumulation of evidence reaching a tipping point combined with an incident that made delay impossible. The impasse happened because Allied governments had been quietly urging American institutions to address the crisis internally. They preferred that Congress, the courts, or voters solve the Trump problem without international intervention. But Congress remained paralyzed. Courts moved slowly, and the accumulating evidence of corruption went undressed. Now here's the kicker. According to sources who spoke with CBS News, the final trigger was intelligence suggesting that Trump had shared classified information provided by Allied services with Russian officials. One source described an intercepted communication in which a Russian intelligence officer discussed information that could only have come from Allied sources shared with the United States. Whether Trump shared this information deliberately or inadvertently, Allied governments concluded their intelligence assets were at risk as long as they continued treating America as a trusted partner. While American officials have denied any intelligence compromise, Allied governments apparently found the evidence compelling enough to act. According to a British official quoted by The Guardian, they were faced with a choice between protecting their intelligence sources and maintaining a fiction of normal relations with Washington. This was the moment the Western alliance fractured in ways not seen since before World War II. The fundamental assumption of American foreign policy that democratic allies will always stand together has been shattered by allies who concluded that America's current leadership was too corrupt to trust. And then came Trump's response, which managed to make an already catastrophic situation worse. He took to Truth Social within minutes of the announcement, calling Allied leaders globalist traitors and threatening to withdraw all American troops from Europe and cancel all defense agreements immediately. He called the sanctions an act of war and suggested that America might need to reconsider who its real friends are. But then, when financial markets continued to plummet and Republican senators began expressing concern, Trump's threat of immediate military withdrawal was walked back by administration officials. The mixed messages created additional uncertainty about American policy and further damaged confidence in American leadership. Now, this left the American government in an impossible position. On one side, responding aggressively to Allied sanctions could escalate the crisis into a complete rupture of the Western alliance. Withdrawing troops, canceling agreements, and imposing counter-sanctions on allies would leave America isolated and would delight adversaries like Russia and China. On the flip side, accepting the sanctions without response would be seen domestically as humiliating weakness. Trump's base would demand retaliation. The tricky part is that every response option makes things worse, so the administration is caught in a bind. They can either escalate by withdrawing from NATO and imposing counter-sanctions, which means destroying alliances built over generations and handing strategic victories to Putin and Xi. That would reshape the global order in ways that damage American interests for decades. Or they can seek to negotiate a de-escalation, which means acknowledging that Allied concerns have some legitimacy and potentially cooperating with investigations. But that contradicts everything Trump has said about the witch hunt against him. It's a tough situation, and it's entirely of Trump's making. Years of attacking allies, questioning commitments, and now documented evidence of corruption have produced consequences that cannot be spun away. This whole scenario is causing complete chaos throughout Washington. If America's closest allies have sanctioned the president, every assumption about American foreign policy needs to be reconsidered. Korea diplomats are reportedly in shock. Pentagon officials are trying to assess what allied sanctions mean for ongoing military cooperation. Intelligence officials are grappling with the collapse of sharing arrangements that have been foundational for decades. Those Republican senators who have been defending Trump are now facing impossible questions. According to Politico, several senators issued statements expressing concern about allied actions without directly defending Trump. The careful wording suggested they were looking for exits. Meanwhile, Democrats are calling for emergency hearings and demanding that Congress assert itself to repair allied relationships. Some are suggesting that only Trump's removal from office can restore international confidence in American leadership. Things became even more intense when financial sector leaders began issuing warnings. According to CNBC, executives from major banks held emergency calls discussing the implications of being unable to process transactions with sanctioned Trump-connected entities. Some Trump Organization properties rely on financing from banks with European operations, and those banks now face impossible choices. Lawrence Tribe, Harvard constitutional law professor, went on MSNBC and made a statement that really should catch everyone's attention. Legal experts are noting that these sanctions create unprecedented complications for a sitting president. He said, "We have never seen anything like this in American history," noting that allied nations sanctioning an American president treats him as they would treat a corrupt authoritarian, and the evidence they cite suggests that's exactly what he has become. Just think about that for a moment. A leading constitutional scholar is saying that America's allies have concluded our president is indistinguishable from the dictators we used to jointly oppose. Richard Haass, former president of the Council on Foreign Relations, appeared on CNN and described the sanctions as a world historical turning point. He explained that the post-World War II order, which America built and led, is fracturing because our allies no longer trust American leadership. The implications for global stability are genuinely frightening. So, let's break down what these sanctions could mean, because this isn't just a diplomatic spat. It has serious consequences for American power, security, and economic prosperity. First up is the immediate economic impact. The sanctions freeze assets and restrict transactions for Trump and connected entities across 4 major allied economies. Trump Organization properties in the UK and Ireland face immediate complications. Financial institutions are reviewing all Trump-connected accounts. The business empire that Trump has refused to separate from his presidency is now under direct economic attack by allied governments. But the broader economic implications extend far beyond Trump personally. Market uncertainty about American stability affects investment, trade, and the dollar's value. According to economists quoted by the Wall Street Journal, prolonged allied sanctions could shave significant points off American GDP growth and accelerate the shift away from dollar-denominated transactions. Now, let's touch on what this means for American security. The Western Alliance has been the foundation of American security strategy since 1945. Collective defense through NATO, intelligence sharing through Five Eyes, and coordinated diplomacy through the G7 have multiplied American power and protected American interests globally. These sanctions signal that allied governments no longer consider themselves bound by those arrangements. In the same way, if intelligence sharing remains restricted, American agencies lose access to information they've relied on for decades. If NATO coordination fractures, adversaries gain opportunities they haven't had since the Cold War. If allied governments begin hedging by developing relationships with China, American influence globally diminishes. Looking ahead to the political implications, Republicans face the 2026 midterms. With America's allies having declared the party's leader too corrupt to engage with normally, candidates will have to either defend Trump and accept international pariah status or distance themselves and face primary challenges. There is no comfortable middle ground. So here's the deal. America's closest allies, the nations that have stood with us through every crisis for generations, just imposed sanctions on Donald Trump and his inner circle. They cited corruption, constitutional violations, and threats to democratic governance. They froze assets, banned travel, and restricted financial transactions. And they did it together in a coordinated strike that demonstrates just how completely Trump has alienated the democratic world. This isn't just about strained relationships or diplomatic tension. It's about America being treated for the first time like a rogue state by its own allies. It's about the complete collapse of trust that took decades to build.
If Trump can survive even this with America's allies formally declaring him a threat to democratic governance, then we're basically saying there's no external check on American presidential corruption. The internal institutions have failed. Now, the external ones are trying to fill the gap. It's about so much more than just Trump's presidency. It's about whether America can remain the leader of the democratic world when democratic allies have concluded our leader is unfit for partnership. So keep an eye on this. The economic fallout is just beginning. Allied governments are weighing additional measures, and the question of whether the Western alliance can survive Trump's presidency remains terrifyingly unresolved. The stakes have never been higher, the isolation more complete, and the consequences for American power more severe than anything we've witnessed since the founding of the Republic.